According to Viral Nova, quote, "For most people, there is nothing more terrifying than the prospect of being buried alive. Luckily, thanks to advances in medical technology, it's very difficult for it to accidentally happen anymore. However, that wasn't always the case. Just look at the story of Octavia Smith Hatcher," end quote. This bizarre story happened in the late 1800s in Pikeville, Kentucky. And it is one of those stories that is believed to be true, but has not been confirmed 100%. But there are many from the town of Pikeville that do believe this horrific story of James and Octavia Smith Hatcher. James and Octavia were a married couple living in Pikeville, Kentucky. Octavia gave birth to a son, Jacob, on January 4th, 1891. Unfortunately, her son passed away within hours of birth. At that time, there was a sickness going around town that affected all ages, but seemed to primarily target the youth. It seems that unknown disease took the life of her newborn son. This tragic event in Octavia's life caused her to fall into a serious deep depression over the death of her firstborn, and Octavia also became ill to the point where she was bedridden and eventually slipped into a coma. By May of the same year, James Hatcher got a doctor to come to his home and check on his wife's declining condition. She was pronounced dead on May 2nd, 1891, of unknown causes and was buried in the Pikeville Cemetery. At that time, embalming was not common for burial, and it was particularly hot weather at the time of Octavia's death, so she was buried rather quickly. Now, this is where the story makes a bizarre turn. After Octavia died, many other people in the community came down with the same unknown disease that she had, but those people eventually woke up from their comas. This deeply disturbed James Hatcher because he thought maybe they had made a mistake and shouldn't have buried his wife. He was so disturbed that he had her body dug up. According to Viral Nova, quote, "What he discovered when they opened the buried coffin was a sight of pure horror. It turns out that Octavia was indeed still alive when she was buried. The inside of the coffin was scratched and torn to pieces. She was obviously terrified before she finally passed on. The tragedy was overwhelming," end quote. I can't imagine how distraught James Hatcher was over this discovery. And to show some honor to his wife, he had his wife reburied into the same grave and erected a statue of Octavia on her gravesite as a memorial of her and the awful circumstances of her death. Her statue remains in the Pikeville Cemetery today. There have been many reports that the sickness that plagued the townspeople at that time was sleeping sickness, which puts people in a comatose state without killing them. It has also been reported that the sickness was caused by an African tsetse fly, mosquito-borne encephalitis, or by gas escaping from a coal mine. This tragedy, although it hasn't been proven, has brought much attention to Pikeville, Kentucky, and along with that, there are stories of supernatural occurrences surrounding Octavia's gravesite, including cat sounds, the spirit of Octavia looming in the cemetery, and reports that her statue spins on the anniversary of her death to symbolically turn its back on the town because of what happened to her. However, the Hatcher family put a fence around her gravesite, and I believe the spinning ceased because it was most likely due to pranksters. So I wondered why this story was not covered at the time, and why there was so little information on this tragedy. And I came across this article on roadside.com, quote, "An absence of news accounts on this newsworthy event is often cited by its critics as proof that it didn't happen. But Octavia Hatcher wasn't just anybody. She was the daughter of one of Pike County's elite families. Her husband, James Hatcher, owned thousands of acres of Pike County land and made his fortune in timber and coal. Octavia Hatcher's gruesome fate made for juicy gossip, but actually reporting it could have been seen as a bad business decision for a local newspaper or undertaker or doctor in what was essentially a company town," end quote. The article went on to say that some relatives of James Hatcher do not believe the story to be true. James Hatcher never remarried and lived 50 years after the death of his wife and child. And according to Ranker.com, quote, James Hatcher became terrified of succumbing to the same fate as his wife after her death, and not without good reason, considering how common the sleeping sickness was at the time of her death. In order to ensure he wouldn't suffer like his wife, he had a custom coffin built to help prevent him from being buried alive. Rumor has it, James was buried with a string tied around his finger that was strung up to a bell found above the ground. In the event he was accidentally buried alive, James could ring the bell to call for help, end quote. I hope this story is not true. Bloopers. The article went on to say that some relatives of James Hatchet do not believe this. Oh, not Hatchet. It has been reported that the sickness that's plagued. Okay.